The race for the next UN Secretary General has dramatically expanded this week, with two more candidates jumping into the contest to succeed Antonio Guterres, who wraps up his second term at the end of December. Now, this week, Ecuador's former foreign minister, Ibon Baki, announced her bid for the UN's top job. Then we had Uganda's former foreign minister, Orara Otunu, who just made his pitch to become the UN Secretary General before a General Assembly Committee meeting, where he stressed UN reforms and ending existing conflicts. Let's hear more of what he had to say.
Today, we are in a situation of major conflicts around the globe. These conflicts must constitute a particular priority for the Secretary General. Engaged, present, probing, listening, seeking opportunities to suggest a way out, all recognizing that in the end the decision will be on the part of the parties in conflict and the major players.
Now, on Thursday, Ecuador's former foreign minister, Ibon Baki, will also engage in a dialogue with members of the General Assembly and civil society. Then on Friday, the UN Security Council will hold a private straw poll meeting about which candidate they will eventually refer and recommend to the General Assembly as the next Secretary General.
Ecuadorian diplomat Ibon Baki has entered the race to become the next United Nations Secretary General, becoming the 8th candidate seeking to succeed Antonio Guterres. Baki, a former Ecuadorian government minister and ambassador to several countries, was nominated by Tonga. She said she wants to bring fresh ideas and make the UN more effective in addressing global conflicts. The next Secretary General will face growing calls for UN reform amid criticism over its bureaucracy and demands for greater efficiency. Baki is the second candidate from Ecuador in the race. Other contenders include former Costa Rican Vice President Rebecca Greenspan, former Chilean President Michelle Bachelet, and former Ecuadorian Foreign Minister Maria Fernanda Espinosa. Guterres is due to step down at the end of the year after 2 5-year terms. The UN Security Council has begun informal polling as part of the selection process, with a second round expected later this week. Pass Blue, an independent non-profit media organisation covering the United Nations, survey of around 1,500 readers put Greenspan in first place with 32% of the vote. Espinosa followed with 23.4%, while Bachelet received 21.9%. The next Secretary General is expected to take office on January 1st, 2027, following a recommendation by the Security Council and appointment by the General Assembly.
Today's open debate gains particular salience given the questions among citizens of member states on the credibility, efficacy and legitimacy of the Security Council and its decision-making. The underlying reason has been this principal organ's inability to purposefully intervene in raging conflicts across different parts of the globe. This has come at a huge cost to humanity, particularly in the form of unabated human suffering. The need for reforming the Security Council is more pronounced and pressing than ever before. Our joint endeavour must be on appropriately equipping the UNSC to address contemporary and future challenges. The world of 1945 has changed beyond recognition. UN membership has grown fourfold since then. The outcome of one conflict 80 years ago cannot determine the composition, dynamics, approaches, and working methods for perpetuity. This needs to change and must happen at the earliest. India's position on reforms of the Security Council are well known. We seek an expansion in both categories with greater representation for the Global South. This could be achieved only through text-based negotiations with clearly defined milestones and timelines. In this backdrop, I would like to make the following specific points with regard to working methods. First, a discussion on improvement of UNSC working methods must not be done in isolation. It is an important aspect of the broader umbrella of UNSC reforms and inherently linked to other clusters such as categories of membership, regional representation and veto, among others. Any reform of the Security Council must account for all these clusters as a whole in order to make it comprehensive, real and meaningful. Second, it has been more than 80 years and the rules of procedure of the Security Council continue to be provisional. The provisional nature of these rules also suggests that they could be amended suitably from time to time. Therefore, existing working methods must not be cited as a challenge or obstacle to implement reforms, particularly in terms of expanding the membership. Further, the provisional framework per se also needs corrections. Third, non-permanent members are elected by the wider UN membership through the General Assembly. They shoulder the responsibilities entrusted upon them by other member states. In order to enable the non-permanent members to make meaningful contributions during their respective two-year terms, all Security Council members must enjoy the same set of privileges in terms of access to documents. Access to historical documents must not be the exclusive preserve of a few. Similarly, there must be greater transparency in several ongoing processes of the Security Council. For instance, elected members and by implication the General Assembly must have a greater say in crucial aspects such as the election of the UN Secretary General. Another important sphere is peacekeeping. TCCs and PCCs go far beyond the UNSC membership. Therefore, as direct stakeholders, they must be part of the UNSC decision-making architecture pertaining to all key questions of peacekeeping, such as mandates and resources. Fourth, subsidiary bodies serve important functions and enable better implementation of the Security Council mandates. However, these bodies have not been able to deliver optimally in the recent past, primarily due to the delay in finalizing the chairs. As no decision has been taken till date for the current year, India calls on the Security Council to urgently address this issue and finalize the chairs on priority. Moving forward, Note 507 must be suitably amended so as to have a definitive and non-negotiable timeline for finalizing the chairs of subsidiary bodies. Finally, Security Council membership brings significant responsibilities. This must not become a platform to pursue narrow political interests. Listing and delisting are a case in point. There must be more transparency and objectivity on this front. Presence in the Security Council must not be instrumentalized to legitimize terrorists by attempting to delist them or to list other entities as terrorist organizations based solely on political considerations without any objective criteria or supporting documentation. Madam President, in closing, India would like to emphasize that the Security Council requires greater coordination with other principal organs, particularly the UN General Assembly, which remains the most universal and democratic arm of the UN. Institutional mechanisms such as consideration of the UNSC annual report by UNGA must not become a mere procedural formality. Working methods of the Security Council must be reviewed suitably in order to pave the way for closer interaction of the Security Council with other principal organs. Future consideration of the working methods must, therefore, be seen in this light. I thank you, Madam President.
Excellence, Madame la Présidente.
Excellencies, Madam President of the General Assembly, distinguished ambassadors, esteemed delegates, members of civil society, Madam President, I thank you for organizing this dialogue and for giving me the opportunity to engage with you. I would like to thank the Secretary General as well as the staff of the United Nations for their dedication and service to the organization. Our tribute to them is all the more poignant today on the anniversary of the deaths of 22 United Nations staff in the August 2003 bombing of the UN offices in Baghdad. Among those killed were two of my dear friends, Sergio Vieira de Mello of Brazil and Nadia Younis of Egypt. And one of the survivors, Mr. Salim Lone of Kenya, is with us today in this very chamber. I also wish to salute my colleagues and fellow candidates for their commitment and their offer to serve the United Nations. Madam President, in the UN Charter, there is a focus on this solemn commitment. We, the people of the United Nations, are resolved to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, to reaffirm our faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, to ensure the equality of rights between men and women, as well as between great and small nations, to establish the conditions for justice, and to promote social progress, as well as to ensure better standards of life in larger freedom. It is upon the bedrock of this collective pledge that the three pillars of the UN's work are built. That is to say, peace and security, human rights, and sustainable development. We must continue to work substantively on all of these pillars. The United Nations is the only body that represents all of humanity. It was founded in the aftermath of a brutal global war and against the backdrop of the Holocaust to promote international cooperation and to foster the settlement of international disputes by peaceful means. At no time has this mission been more essential than today. We are living at a time of profound upheaval and radical changes marked by grave threats to international peace and security. There's growing fragmentation of the global economy and deep economic fractures. There is a wavering consensus on the fundamental principles of human rights. Crucial issues linked to climate and environment are arising at a time when autonomous systems and artificial intelligence may evolve to dominate the human race. And yet, with rapid advances in the field of AI, together with other major advances and profound transformations in science and technology, This may lead to a golden age in human history, a time in which hitherto incurable diseases could be prevented or cured, a time to lift billions of people out of poverty through financial and digital inclusion. It is against this backdrop of hope and of great promise, as well as of growing threats, that the United Nations once again is called upon to fulfill its historic charge.
Even though we must keep our view firmly on the three pillars of UN action, from time to time the flow of events will shape priorities and emphasis. Today we are in a situation of major conflicts around the globe. These conflicts must constitute a particular priority for the Secretary General. Engaged, present, probing, listening, seeking opportunities to suggest a way out, all recognizing that in the end the decision will be on the part of the parties in conflict and the major players. I especially have in mind the conflicts in Ukraine, Gaza, the Great Lakes region of Africa, Sudan, Iran, the Horn of Africa, the Sahel. One of the most disturbing features of the situations I refer to is the fact that innocent civilians, particularly women and children, are disproportionately affected by these conflicts. It is one of the reasons why we cannot stand still. We must do everything within our powers to act. Over the years, we have continued to emphasize the importance of human rights. In the words of the Charter, fundamental human rights and the dignity and worth of the human person. These are the words of the Charter. And we must return to the basics in terms of the regime of human rights of which I speak. The basics as postulated in the Charter. For a human rights approach to be credible and enjoy broad legitimacy, every effort must be made to guard against politicization, instrumentalization, and the intrusion of ideology in our pursuit of human rights. There should be greater sensitivity to different cultural perspectives and social norms. The UN must better understand and acknowledge the deep traditions and cultures of human dignity, respect, and social cohesion that exist in many societies. This, in part, will be my approach for rebuilding consensus on the issue of human rights back to the basics. For the United Nations to discharge the responsibilities set out in the Charter, let me say this clearly and simply. Reform is no longer an optional choice. It is an imperative. Without it, the institution is at grave risk. We cannot continue to do business as usual. To do so would be a grave mistake and error of judgment. Key to the organization's success is its legitimacy, effectiveness, and efficiency. and therefore the reform initiative subsumed under UN 80 must not only be continued as a priority of the Secretary General, but be a continuous process that becomes part of the DNA, the outlook, the culture of the organization. Every organization that wishes to be at the cutting edge, vibrant and viable, must consistently bring review and constantly. Madam President, as Secretary General, I would put priority on harnessing the incredible force which is being unleashed by artificial intelligence to make this a force for good for the entire world community with access and benefit for all. I have, over the last 5 years, been based in northern Uganda. And when the calls and messages asking me to consider to be a candidate for this position came, I was in northern Uganda. What was I doing there? Many of you will recall this is a part of the world that was radically destroyed, collapsed, as a result of over 20 years of the LRA war. So I've been engaged with others in the enterprise of rebuilding, of restoring, of resuscitating a terribly broken society. I have some idea what peace building means at the ground level. And I believe that United Nations should make it its business to enunciate policies and standards from New York and Geneva and Vienna, but also follow to see the impact on the ground at the national and community level. And finally, Madam President, what I offer, if I'm given the opportunity to be Secretary General, is broad and very deep experience of working across all the 3 pillars of the UN. It is a track record of building consensus and offering innovative solutions in times of deadlock and crisis. And I would just, Madam President, please end on this note because this inspires me. It is St. Francis of Assisi. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. I would embrace this role with the same passion, commitment that I've shown in every leadership position I've had here. I thank you very much, Madam President.
The press, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. It's my honor to present to you Ambassador Orara Otunu, candidate for Secretary General of the United Nations. He has just set out his vision to the General Assembly, and now he's here to take your questions. Ambassador Otunu.
Ladies and gentlemen of the media, before I say anything, may I please introduce you to our Prime Minister Emeritus, Dr. Ruakana Rugonda. He's one of the most eminent leaders in our country at the international level as well. He served as ambassador here, Prime Minister many years, and is now senior presidential envoy and the one who is leading our lobbying effort. We are also very honored to have here Ambassador Kakonge, who is the Ugandan ambassador to the United States, based in Washington, D.C. And earlier I told you how touched we are that Mr. Salim Lone, who is one of the survivors of that horrific attack in Baghdad in 2003, is today here with us on this very poignant occasion. So thank you. I'm happy to be with you, and I'll take your questions.
Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Damilola. I write for Paz Blue. My first question, there's been a lot of speculations around why you're just coming out now. Not only have you been an institution within the UN for a long time ago, the last time you had any position at the UN was 2005. Not only are you 2 decades late, so to say, for this race, but also you joined the race itself when the process had progressed substantially. If you could talk about that, would be great. Thank you.
Well, just 2 things. I hope that my breadth and depth of experience, covering some 4 decades, covering all 3 pillars of the United Nations, meaning peace and security, on which I've worked in the Security Council as Under-Secretary General, but also when I was president of International Peace Academy, now IPI, my work on development and my work on human rights. Human rights, together with Prime Minister Dr. Ruakana Rugunda, we cut our teeth in the struggle against the rule of Idi Amin in Uganda. So all my adult life, I have been engaged in the promotion of human rights. So I hope that that breadth and depth of experience is what the UN needs today. More than that, some of you may know that in the leadership positions I've occupied here at the UN and elsewhere, my trademark has been 2 things: building consensus, even when things are very contentious. 2 examples you may recall. One, the Otunu formula, which is now being used since 1981 to elect the Secretary General. I was able to put that together in 1981. 2, in this very hall, in this very hall, the General Assembly, 1983. You may recall in October, in the middle of the General Assembly, we had the Grenada crisis. The government was overthrown, new forces took over, the president was killed, and we had 2 delegations turn up here to represent Grenada. At that time, I was the chair of the Credentials Committee, and it fell to my lot to work out something to get the General Assembly out of a 3-week paralysis that had befallen the General Assembly. Later again, when I was Under-Secretary General working on the issue of children and armed conflict, previous to my pioneering work, the Security Council preoccupation was essentially about the security of states. Nothing wrong with that. That's what the Charter had provided. It fell to my lot to forge a consensus, to build a common position within the Security Council to incorporate the most vulnerable segment of our population, children, in situations of conflict, and women and other innocent civilians. That machinery is now being expanded to incorporate very important provision for protection, for enforcement, and I'm very happy about that. So really, I bring that experience. And now just you may have heard, when I began receiving calls and messages from around the globe suggesting that I should consider entering this race, I was not in New York. I was not in London or Paris. I was not even in Kampala. I was deep in the womb of the countryside in northern Uganda. Why? Because as you may remember, very few places suffered as northern Uganda as a result of 20 years of war and encampment. This is the place that you remember the Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs once called the worst forgotten crisis in the world. So for the last 5 years or so, I've been working together with others, with the community, building a non-partisan, across-the-board movement to restore, to rebuild, to resuscitate this once progressive, dynamic society, which is now a shadow of its former self. So I would hope that this body of experience, which is probably unusual in their breadth and depth, might be useful for the UN and the international community at this particular moment. Let me say also, when I say to the members, the UN can no longer bear the full burden of what has been placed on it. The UN should look to share, to partner with others, especially regional groups. When I was at the UN and when I was at the International Peace Academy, part of what I did with various regional groups was building that partnership. So I would hope that when we are looking for a Secretary General who is active, who is engaged, who knows the permanent members, knows the membership, has actually had a track record of building consensus and proposing innovative solutions in difficult situations, I would hope that members might have a favorable look at my own background. So that is the answer to the questions you asked.
Your Excellency, also, the UN right now is going through its worst financial crisis in decades. You've talked about innovative things that you've done in the past. What new solutions might you have in solving this perennial problem for the UN right now?
First, Madam, I have said that the enterprise of reform today at the UN is not an optional choice. Where the UN finds itself today, this is an imperative. We cannot continue with business as usual. The UN is at risk. We will make a grave error of judgment if we continue as is. But the purpose of doing fundamental reforms at the UN is precisely to strengthen an institution that is needed in the world. You heard all the questions from member states, showing the role that they see the UN playing, what they expect from the UN. And for the UN to play the role expected of member states and what the Charter provides, needs to be a legitimate UN, a credible UN, a UN whose culture and method of work builds its legitimacy and impact. So that is what I hope that the reform I'm proposing will do. Not kill multilateralism, but rebuild it, reposition it, strengthen it, create more impact on the ground so that we have what I would call the UN of service.
Thank you very much. If you could introduce yourself and then pose a question.
Yes, my name is Orara Otunu. I'm with Al-Quds Al-Arabi. Vous voulez que je vous pose la question en français or English?
You may speak in English. I'm happy to hear English or French, as you prefer. I will answer in English. It's okay.
Okay.
No, it's okay.
You said during the interactive dialogue that the suffering in Gaza is becoming unacceptable. So my question for you is, what is your concrete plan if you get elected, as a Secretary General, to promote genuine reconciliation between Palestinians and Israelis especially among younger generations, in order to build lasting peace based on the principles of the United Nations Charter? And thank you, sir.
Absolutely. I cited Gaza as an example of a conflict that we cannot stand by and watch unfold. It is a major conflict with major geopolitical implications, but above all, with unbelievable impact on ordinary, innocent people. So the Secretary General needs to be involved, even as the Secretary General recognizes that the decision-making at the end of the day may not rely on the Secretary General. But the Secretary General must be engaged, must visit, must talk to the parties in conflict, must see opportunities where he or she might suggest something useful, and must continue to highlight this situation for the world to see. So the role of the Secretary General is very important in trying to see what can be done with the key actors, the parties in conflict. He or she cannot do much on their own. But if they're involved, they're listening patiently, they're probing, they're suggesting, something may give way. That is one, ending the conflict in Gaza. But secondly, we cannot stop there, because the issue in that region, the issue of Palestine and the Palestinians have been with us for a long time. So we must proceed right away to go deeper and find ways of generating a lasting solution. That's where we must go. And again, what does this entail? The Secretary General won't have the power to say, let this be and it shall be. No. But the Secretary General must engage with all the parties in the conflict, all the key actors in the situation, be part of the solution, and I hope it will be possible for the Secretary General to make some suggestions that will prove useful and open the way to a lasting solution.
I will allow you a follow-up question, but if there are others, please make it quick.
Sorry, what were you saying? Go ahead.
Thank you very much for your answer. I'm just asking, is there a specific method of action, specific plan to achieve the goals that you are talking about?
No. From this side, I cannot say that. But one Secretary General, by being engaged, talking to the parties in conflict, listening to what they are saying, getting a sense of where they are and where things are blocked, possibilities then may present themselves that the Secretary General can be helpful. But from where I am, I can't say to you, A, B, C, D is what we shall do. But we begin by the Secretary General being intimately engaged, listening to the parties in conflict, probing, and seeking opportunities where the UN can be helpful. Merci.
Thank you very much. Oh, you have?
Yes, if I could, I work with Damalola at Pass Blue. I wanted to ask you about the fact that President Museveni has endorsed you when, in fact, you have been in the opposition party. If you could explain those politics, because there is a lot of information out in the social media that may be misinformation or disinformation. Thank you.
President Museveni and I know each other well. We go back a long time, together with my brother, the Prime Minister. We were engaged together in the struggle against the Idi Amin regime. Subsequently, our paths diverged politically, including with my brother, the Prime Minister. And indeed, within Uganda, there are important points of divergence that needs to be talked through. I have myself, in the context of Uganda, it may not be of much interest to you, but I've always said in the context of Uganda that we need to engage in a very independent, thoroughgoing, truth-telling exercise concerning some of the dark episodes in our history. Two, I have said, we need from there to have acknowledgement. But we acknowledge what each of us may have contributed to those dark episodes. And that will then liberate us to climb onto the hill of national reconciliation. It's not for purpose of retribution, not for purpose of revenge, but in order to achieve genuine national reconciliation. And that remains a discussion which I continue to have with Mr. Museveni and with other leaders in Uganda. And that indeed, by the way, is my position not only with regard to Uganda, but in other situations where I've been involved, situations of conflict, of dark episodes in the history of countries. I've called for the same thing. And I have advocated the same thing in my own country.
What do you say to all the people who think that a woman should be the next Secretary General?
The United Nations should be a United Nations of inclusion. All aspects of inclusion, whether in terms of geography, gender, culture, faiths, all inclusion. It should be an inclusive institution. And all considerations along those lines should be taken into account. They are legitimate, they are important. But at the end of the day, it is for members of the Security Council and then the general membership of the UN, when they put everything on the weighing machine, they put everything to say at this particular moment in the history of the UN and the world, this is what we think we need, this is what is a good fit, this is what we decide upon. That is for the Security Council members and the general membership to decide. But these are all very important, legitimate, and much appreciated considerations taken alongside other considerations.